Today, the focus is on the application process and how to complete the application, as well as the eligibility and what is needed to make an eligibility determination. So the learning outcomes that we hope you take away with you will be to, number one, be able to complete an appropriate application for TBR services. Number two, better understand the importance of completing an accurate determination of eligibility. Number three, learn the steps to requesting important supportive documentation of disability, as well as what type of documentation are most effective in the application and eligibility process. And number four, develop your individual program practices and apply practices that are most effective in creating a streamlined application and eligibility process for consumers and the program. So the very first step as we're looking at application, and before we get into it, I would like to have you indulge me a minute. I was thinking about when I was a director of a program, and I was thinking about those initial conversations with potential consumers. And so think about this. Think about, I am an American Indian woman. I am 22 years of age. I have co-occurring disorder, schizophrenia, and I am a heroin user. I dropped out of school and I do not have a GED. I live on the reservation with my family. We are impoverished and I do not have any good role models. I was arrested for possession of heroin. I live in the Southwest, and my great-great-grandmother told stories of her boarding school experience. So when you hear that last statement, that is what we know as historic trauma, yes? So I would, when I heard a scenario such as this, think about the fear of someone coming to the VR program and asking for help, not something that's traditional. So I'd like you, each of you, whether, no matter what position you hold in your AVERS program, is to think about, how do you receive this person into your program? Do you judge them? Do you find them distasteful? Is this just a job? Or are you kind and welcoming? And do you really want to help this person? You're really out there. Your heart is part of, is wrapped up in this person sitting in front of you asking for help. So I'd like you to think about that, your hospitality to the applicants of the program. So when we're in the assessment part of the VR process, there may be, I'm wondering if this seems, as I thought it kind of jumped over one. Sorry about that. So the application is that very first step, right? In gathering all the information that you need to determine a person eligible or ineligible for the program. The pertinent and important identification information needs to be included. You're looking to find verification of disability. What type of work experience does this person have? What are their academic achievements or lack of achievements? Their social involvement, medical history, and legal history. All of these things are important. And from the very beginning, when you did outreach or intake or the referral process and application, you're building trust and a bond, which is, and I have known to be a lifelong bond with somebody seeking assistance from the AVERS program. So the VR counselor's responsibility is to determine eligibility or ineligibility, and it must be done within, I could hear a chorus, 60 days, right? After the application is completed and submitted. So an individual is considered to have applied for services when the applicant has completed, signed, and submitted the application. And for your information, and over in this left-hand corner, are the regulations that support this particular slide, the information. So now
Hey,
we're,
Suzanne,
yes,
could you make an adjustment on your microphone real quick? We're having a little, like a reverb or echo happening.
oh dear.
It's okay.
I
It
don't,
sound,
is this better?
yeah, it might be that you need to get a little closer and directional, but that one came in loud and clear. Let's try one more time.
Okay, hello?
Sounding better?
Okay. I moved my computer. I tried my headset, and it wouldn't work. I've been having some challenges. Is this any better at all, John?
Yeah, let's start here for a little bit. It sounds less canistery, so we'll go from here. Thank you.
Sounds good. All right. I apologize for that, everyone. Techno.
You're fine.
Okay. Um, so. We will not repeat anything. The slide was up. You could read the slide. So hopefully we're all on the same page. So when we're looking at the assessment piece, we're trying to determine again that a person that comes to you has a physical, a mental impairment that constitutes an impediment to employment. And what we're looking to do is determine whether the applicant, whether the VR services that we would be providing would have an impact on their ability to obtain work, maintain work, and retain work in a field of their choice, right? So it's really important that we identify all of these characteristics so that we can help reduce those barriers in obtaining a person's dream, their goal, what they want to do. When we talk about the extension of eligibility, we're talking about a VR counselor maybe struggling to determine eligibility. So they might need some additional help. So what we're looking at is the extension, which follows a process. Everything is a process. They're interchangeable. They may take on different scopes, but the process is important. So we're looking at a trial work experience, right? And this is for somebody that we are having difficulty in determining if they are capable of achieving an employment outcome. And is the work that they are choosing suitable for them. The trial work must be open no later than the 59th day, and that is because on the 60th day we need to be saying that somebody is eligible for services. And we must have clear evidence. There can't be it cannot be blurred. It must be clear evidence that really states the qualification of this person that is seeking services from your AVERS program. And please do not hesitate to interrupt me, raise your hand, ask questions. Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? And thank you, John, when I'm not being heard at all. Okay. And so what might happen with an extension, it might require trial work experience. And that would mean that the severity of a disability is such that the VR counselor is unable to verify that a person would be able to benefit from vocational rehabilitation services. So in that case, then what you're doing is you need to be able to determine, is this person eligible or ineligible? And then a trial work experience would provide that clear evidence that is really necessary. You can't arbitrarily say, oh, somebody walks in and they have they're a C, they have a significant disability, and without you're making a personal assessment that says, oh, this person can't benefit from our program. There isn't any way that we can provide services. They need to go to another agency, or they're being provided services from another agency. This is not the case. The case is that the trial work experience will help you determine that. And the recommendation that I offer you today is to seek the aid of your state VR agencies. I think a lot of times they have deeper pockets, although in today's environment, we don't know how deep those pockets are. They might not have the deep pockets, but at any rate, my recommendation is still to partner with your VR agency, because they can help in a lot of the extension resources that you might require in order to help somebody become eligible for your program. And so it's just, we're looking at the trial work experience, must include everything, which includes technology consulting. It's just not the norm or what you usually do. You have to be able to think outside the box and to provide the information that provide the testing and then the information required to determine true eligibility or ineligibility. And if for some reason the consumer or the applicant at this point decides that they don't want to go through anything, they don't want to do the trial experience, they suddenly drop out, which we have all experienced from time to time, and there isn't sufficient evidence, you need to be able to continue to move this person forward and discuss with the applicant what there are services that are not appropriate. And if you need to be able to move this individual into a closure. Sometimes you'll be able to have a conversation with the consumer, applicant's consumer, or you may not. And whatever the case is, whatever your policy is, then you would look at closing this case. And Jamie, if you would, I know, never mind. I was going to say keep track of the slides so I can turn this over to you, but I do know the one that, so forget that. Any questions or comments? Jamie, do you want to add anything to any of this before I move forward to the goal?
Well, I was just wondering if perhaps some of the participants in today's webinar might have some experience with extended evaluation. I'm curious how we handle extended evaluation at our different AVERS programs, and if anyone has experience, if they'd like to discuss it.
I think that's really great. Thank you. That's a good idea. Is anybody out there that is willing to share with us this morning?
And I think personally, as a counselor, when I was working in the field, I mainly used the extension for gathering additional data, additional information. And so, there were times when trial work experience had to be implemented due to the severity of the disability. But for the most part, myself, my own personal experience was that I needed more, either testing, evaluation, more documentation for the disability itself. Does anyone else have that experience?
It looks like we have a quiet group here this morning.
Well, we've got some info in the chat. Charlene,
Good. Let's read the chat. Read the chat. Go ahead, Jamie.
oh, I'm sorry. I thought someone else was speaking. So Charlene said that she hasn't had experience with that yet, so she's really curious about it also.
Yeah.
And then Karen also said that she's having issues right now with trial work experience in employers. And yeah, basically due to COVID-19. So I can understand that. And right now was just unprecedented times for everyone. So I'm sure that COVID-19 is affecting employers.
All right. Thank you, Jamie. And for those of you that talked in the chat, thank you for adding something in there. Just didn't want to keep plowing through without giving anybody else an opportunity to chat.
Well, Minnie also said that she's, had to wait on psych evals before. That's understandable. A lot of times, if you don't have the documentation to support the disability claim, then yeah, you're going to have to get evaluations such as the psych eval. And as Julie said, what she's seen with their counselors there at Glitzy is that most of their extensions are needed for more information because of lack of documentation. So really, I think that's a lot of us have the same experience as counselors.
Right. Good conversations. Thank you for providing us what's going on in the chat, Jamie. Appreciate that. So moving forward, what are the goals? And to be able to begin providing services to the applicants of the program. So here are some of the steps. Verify an application is complete and signed by the consumer and VR counselor. And I don't know whether you noticed it or not, but there's a lot of repeat of information. And the reason for that is because when you're trying to discuss this important process, there is going to be a repeat because each phase is then what are we looking at and what is the ultimate goal. So, so apologize or not apologize. I think the repetition is good. For me, I need to hear something about 1 million times before it really sinks in this old head. Anyway, collect necessary information, the documents or assessment information to determine eligibility for services. Confirm that this consumer has indicated that they are willing and able to complete the assessment process. Once the case is open, it is immediately moved into the application status to prepare for the eligibility determination. And then copies of all determining documentation are placed into the newly established consumer case file. It is, and if your process is a little bit different, that's okay. But as long as you are looking at these proposed goals for you, that you can see that you are right on track in what you're doing in your communities. Some examples of an application activity would be, the assessment, collection of medical documents, other necessary items to determine eligibility. Any of you think of any other items that you need? We do have, ABR's program has 6 criteria, which we'll talk about in a minute. And what do we have to do within 60 days? And you have other people you have to depend on as you send out those release of information to get, to gather all the information to make sure you're, you are doing what you need to do for your consumer. So there is, oops, where did it go? Okay, sorry about that. I didn't make you dizzy. The application forms and resources, there's presumed eligibility. Does somebody want to tell me what presumed eligibility means? Besides Jamie and Winona? And Lee? We have some experts out there. You're all in the field.
A person with Social Security.
A person with Social Security. Who's
Yeah.
talking? Who's talking?
That's Meredith.
Hi, Meredith. Could
Hello.
you expand on that a little bit, Meredith?
Somebody who has SSDI.
Good, very good. So a person that is in the state system that has SSI or SSDI, they are presumed eligible for VR services. However, it is really important that every AVERS follows your own, they still have to, they're presumed eligible, but they still have to go through your AVERS process, right? Is that right, Meredith?
Correct.
Okay, good. Thank you so much for participating. Brave. What tribe are you with, Meredith?
The Hopi tribe.
Oh, the Hopi tribe. If I remember correctly, are you the new person on board with the Hopi program?
I've been there 2 years, still
Oh.
feel new. We
Yeah.
do have a new VR tech. Her name's Dion.
Okay, that I've got it mixed up. I think Dion did do some speaking the last time. I apologize, Meredith, for not recognizing around for a bit. No, anyway, thank you for sharing with us. So the other forms that we really want to have is the extension of eligibility. And of course, I'm going to say it again, application form signed by the applicant. It says click on tool, Jamie. I don't know that we have an application that we can share with folks.
We do.
You do? You know what
I
it is?
just I put a link in the chat box to the folder that holds all of our templates, forms, and everything that we've been working on as far as downloadable and fillable Word and PDF versions. So if you need a blank application for your program and you need a form to make your own, you can go to that folder and download the forms. And also on the AVERTAC website, under our webinars and tools and information, you're going to find a section for the VR process. And each step of the VR process will have a toolbox with the forms, the downloadable and fillable versions.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. Jamie's been working on this VR process for AVERTAC, and she's been doing an awesome job. We're just so grateful for the time and effort that she's been putting into this, making this, this is a gift. This is something you want to keep in your toolboxes, all of the programs. So the next slide is a checklist, and checklist is, do you have a release of information? Meredith, can I call on you again? How many release of information would you have in a particular folder, depending on a disability? And you just sign.
It would depend.
Go ahead.
It would depend on their disability. Say, for example, they have a psychological, then we would have one for their department or one for the medical, as well as we also had one for AVERTAC for them to come in and do a review.
Thank you, Meredith. Absolutely. So the point we're making here is that you can't have one release form and use it for multiple, as a multiple resource to gather information about a person. You have to have one for each agency that you need to gather information from. Any kind of medical documents, as Meredith said. We're also looking at copies of picture identification, such as tribal membership, driver's license. A social security card is not something that you really want to copy and keep in somebody's file, but you do want to see it so that you know this person is ready to work. I have experience where we had to go through helping people by obtaining a Social Security card, which means they also had to obtain their birth certificate. So the length of time in gathering those things does take time, and you need to find that out way up front so that you have the time to go through these processes. And like the Social Security card would be a visual verification. Be sure that you're writing a case note after every single application, every email, every phone call, every text message, any walk-in, any communication with an applicant or a consumer requires a case note. You're also looking at the client assistance program. Is your documentation completed? Does the consumer have the information they need? Have you made your case notes? Is the application case notes completed? You know, and the next step is then eligibility. And so this is where we think about, this is the legal part, right? Where you are the only tribal unit designated to determine whether a person is eligible to receive vocational rehabilitation services or not. And I know working for sovereign nations, this becomes a difficult challenge at times because a tribal council may override or try to override what you're saying. You need to be respectful of your sovereign nation leaders, and you need to be able to, in a respectful way, help them understand that that you are the professionals in this particular aspect, and that you are the ones that must be able to determine whether a person can work, cannot work, or receive services, right? And this is a very well thought out 6 criteria. I'm going to show you a document real quickly. This is a document very similar to the one that's on the thing. It has the requirements and that sort of thing. But you see that the requirements are brief. They're not as elaborate as the ones on the slide. These are the RSA approved ones, and they will be also available to you so that you could just download them. But I love the ones on the slide, because they embellish and they give you a little bit more meat about what it's about. So when you're looking at it, I bet every one of you can tell me your application, you know, what is the eligibility criteria, right? The applicant has proof of membership in the state or federally recognized tribe. Number 2, the applicant must reside on or near the reservation and or within the designated tribal service area. Some of you are not just small, some of you take up quite a bit of land, quite a different, many different communities or counties. So make sure that it is listed in your, that you have the mileage in all of the communities and counties that make it the designated service area. Applicant must have a documented physical or mental impairment that creates a substantial impediment to employment. The applicant can benefit in terms of an employment outcome from VR services provided by ABERS. The applicant requires ABERS services. The applicant requires VR services to prepare for, enter into, and engage in or retain employment consistent with the applicant's strengths, resources, priorities, concerns, abilities, capabilities, and informed choice. At this point, are there any questions, concerns, comments, either verbally or in the chat box? Is there anything that you want to add to this part of the presentation this morning? This is all about you and what you need and want. Lee, did you want to say something?
Not at this time. Thank you for asking.
Okay, all right. I thought somehow or other I thought you did. Anyone else? Kim, sometimes you like to chat and you're willing to give me something. You've talked before. Oh, Julie, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to say something, Julie?
Oh, no, my computer just keeps going blank, so I must have hit something wrong. Sorry.
Oh, welcome. I love it. Is that that looks like, I think it's a butterfly. It almost looks like a bumblebee, but it looks like a butterfly there.
Yep, it's a butterfly.
All right. Minnie, did you want to say something? Michael from Hoopa, did you want to say something? Sonia? I hear somebody breathing.
I think it was me. I was curious. I just want to ask a question from everyone that's participating in the webinar today. So what I'm curious, when you set your appointment after orientation or after the referral process, and you set the appointment for the consumer to come in to complete the application, how do you do that? I mean, do you send a letter and tell them to go ahead and bring documentation with them to that first appointment so that you can start gathering information for eligibility? Or do you go right into, you know, from application directly into the eligibility portion? I'm just curious. I'd like to hear from folks how they conduct their meetings and gather information.
Good question, Jamie. Okay. Meredith, do you want to try?
Good morning, this is Minnie.
Oh, hi, Minnie.
Hi, I usually make the telephone call and explain our process. And most of our applicants are in the villages, and we're in Bethel, and we're not on the road. So we do telephonic and faxes. They fax their tribal ID. And if I need medical ROI, I fax them too, and they fax it back. And once I get the medical record, it can take a while for the medical record. And that's when I do, I interview them telephonically most of the time, if they're not in Bethel. Yeah, that's how we work here in Bethel.
Thank you, Minnie. I appreciate that. Meredith, did you want to say something? Wayne Miller said hello this morning, and he's having technical problems, but he said he's reading lips, and he's joking and laughing. Yes, but sorry to hear that. That's really frustrating, Wayne. Keep hanging in there and keep trying. Meredith, did you want to try and give us a little bit of answer Jamie's question? Sorry, once you volunteer, it's like, oh wow, we've got a person. So there you are. Tag, you're it, babe.
Yeah, sure. I don't mind. So for our process, we used to have them come in, do orientation intake at one time, and then have them sign the application. But once we lost our VR tech, I took over the process and realized that that is too short of a time. So now when people turn in their referral, we call them, ask appropriate time for appointment. And then we send a letter and explaining that we'll do an orientation. So for the orientation, takes about an hour. We go over the process of HVR, what we do at Hopi, our services, and talk about CAP, signing, you know, have them sign off a checkoff list that we've gone over certain things during the orientation. And if we give them 2-week notice to determine whether or not they're still interested in the program. And if they are, we call them back in for an intake application process. So we realized that the application that we had was similar to the same questions we asked during the intake. So we combined the intake application together so that they sign it. So during the orientation, we also include the ROIs. And if they are considering coming back in 2 weeks, we have them start signing the ROI. So we have all that by the time their intake takes place. So that pushes the eligibility process much quicker. But that's basically how we're starting our process now.
I like that, Meredith. That's excellent. I also found not to rush an applicant, to give them to give them time to process. It's a lot of information, and I think that you are doing a great service by slowing things down a little bit and giving people the opportunity to really hear what you're saying. So good job. That's excellent. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I truly agree with that, because in the past I felt it was pretty rushed. They signed the application, and once you determine them eligible, it's like, wait a minute, I didn't know I had to participate in all this stuff. I don't want to do it right now. Then you find yourself asking them the question, are you sure you want to stop the program? You know, and then we try to inform them of their decision, whether to continue or not continue, and then we end up having them sign a release to I forgot the name of the form right away, but to have them stop services.
Yeah.
So I've lost several individuals when I had first started out in that process.
Yeah, yeah, and that's important. And the good news is that instead of going, oh, woe is me, change is made. You know, you see something that's not working and you go, wow, we need to try something different. And by trying something different, you really improve the VR process. You create a new policy and procedure for your program and that's really staying in tune. That's really listening. That's really observing. Boy, I take my hat off to you, Meredith. Good job. And thank you for sharing. Wow, that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Susie Calhoun, did you want to say something? I saw your name up there. Can you talk, or are you maybe not? Sometimes people are on board, but they can't talk. What about you, Joanna? Do you want to share any information with us about your process?
Let me just jump in here a minute. Sonia said over in the chat box that during orientation, everything is explained to the potential client, and then they gather the medical information and then go through the checklist to get, you know, the most needed information. So it sounds like they're already collecting information during the orientation process, which is good. I mean, to start collecting information right away is going to be helpful in moving the case into application status. And then Wayne also said that in Warm Springs, you know, due to COVID-19, which I'm sure everyone's facing right now, that they're under a no contact order with consumers. So they're having to do everything by snail mail or do phone interviews. And so those are some of the things that folks are facing right now. And we realize that it's really, you know, hard during this pandemic to do business as usual because we just can't. And so folks are using different ideas for gathering data, gathering information for the application and eligibility process.
Okay, Jamie, you're up. The next slides are yours. So thank you for all your good questions to get people more involved. And I turn it over to you.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen. Or are you going to click through the slideshow?
Click through it. You don't have to do anything. So
oh, okay, great. So this is slide, hold on, I'm getting to it.
it's on the screen. Can you see it?
Yeah, slide 16. Okay, so we're at the point now. We're trying to gather, as we were talking in the chat and discussing, you know, we're trying to get documentation to support the claim of disability or to support the eligibility determination. And so some of the documentation that most, I believe, programs use are the tribal certification or the tribal membership card, a certificate of degree of Indian blood or a CIB card. I'm not sure how many tribes actually use the CIBs, but that is documentation to support the application process to prove that they are eligible to apply for services, not necessarily eligible for the determination of the disability. School records are things that can be collected for the application process. An important thing to remember is the Individualized Education Plan, or the IEP, because if the disability is cognitive related, most times you will have an IEP put in place. And so, you know, it's a good thing to ask the consumer right away if they had an IEP. And that goes back to what Suzanne was talking about earlier in the initial orientation, when you're first asking about, you know, history, medical history, different evaluations and things like that, then the educational history is going to come into play then. And then, of course, medical records, any outside documentation, if they've had any outside vocational or psychological or any other outside evaluations, of course, we want to ask for that information from them as well. And then, as we talked about earlier, on presumptive eligibility, SSI or SSDI documentation, Title II, or any of the Social Security Acts, you want to make sure and get that documentation right away. We can go on. Let's talk about presumptive eligibility. So as I think it was Meredith who said earlier, presumptive eligibility, someone who is collecting SSDI or SSI payments. Presumptive eligibility may be applied to the applicant if they either receive SSI or SSDI. It's presumed because they have been determined by Social Security Administration that there's a disability. So there's a presumption that they do have a physical or mental impairment that constitutes a substantial impediment to employment and benefit from the AVER services. So this is what we're talking about when we say presumptive eligibility or presumed eligible. However, you may find convincing evidence that an applicant is incapable of benefiting from VR services. So, you know, even though they do receive SSI or SSDI and they are presumed eligible for services, you still have to make that determination. Are they going to benefit from services? And then we'll continue on with presumptive eligibility. Convincing evidence for an employment outcome can be demonstrated by providing a trial work experience, which we talked about earlier, or through extended evaluation period as appropriate. So either the trial work experience or the extended evaluation occur while they're still in applicant status. And this gives you the opportunity to explore the applicant's abilities, capabilities, and their capacity to perform in a work situation, or to demonstrate whether they can achieve an employment outcome. When we talk about extension of eligibility determination, an extension is required if the determination of eligibility exceeds the 60 calendar day time frame. So if you are not going to be able to determine eligibility within that 60-day time frame, by day 59, you should know for sure if you're going to be able to determine eligibility. And if you feel like that you can't determine eligibility in that time frame, but you still feel like that this is a good applicant, they should be able to move forward with their application, then that would be the appropriate time to add an extension of eligibility. So either a trial work experience, or if you're looking for more evidence to substantiate that the applicant has a disability. For example, you may have to request a psychological evaluation, or you may need to request additional information. You may need to have a functional limitations assessment done. So this is when you would put in place an extension of eligibility. So here are some different evaluation options from external sources for determining the severity of the disability. And I think that the psychological evaluation is probably something that is done more often or most often when we're trying to determine the applicant's disability eligibility. Also assistive
Excuse
technology.
me.
Yes.
Hi, this is Minnie. Can I ask a question? How you document an extension, or is there a form for extension?
That's a good question, Minnie. I myself would like to know how it is done out in the field. Coming from state VR, I know that it is built into the program's forms and different computerized systems, and you actually request an extension and it's approved by your supervisor. I'm not sure how each program's policy is on that, but I would assume that if you do not have a computerized system, then you would actually fill out an extension and have it approved by your supervisor. Does anyone else have any input on that?
Karen has something in the, maybe not answering that particular question. Ethel talked about we send them a letter of extension. I think each program does, this is where you have to think about your policy and procedure manual. Is this something that's included in your policy and procedure manual? And I would like to read Karen Johnson's chat note. I had a situation where a consumer had a prior assessment by a different provider that indicated he could not work. It made no sense based on my evaluation, and I requested an updated assessment which indicated he had disabilities but was capable of employment. He has become recently employed. Wahoo! Good job, Karen Johnson. That is awesome. Karen, can you provide us information on the question that Minnie asked in terms of how do you or your program, how do you document an extension? How is that achieved at your site?
Well, it's been a little strange lately. We have an acting director, but we don't really have a program director, as it were. So depending upon the situation with the individual, based on other trainings from Abratech, there was a situation where I got a verbal agreement to the extension because the offices were not open for her to be able to access a copy of her tribal ID. And they're still not open. So then I did another extension, during which time she had moved from, the place she was living in was sold, so she had to move to a hotel. I completed the form with her and documented it and uploaded it. So it's been a little bit different looking at it under the circumstances that we're experiencing with COVID-19.
Absolutely.
I probably I'll ask Kim out there what she's done in the past, having a longer history than I have with Glitzy Verna.
Okay, Kim, you're on.
Suzanne?
Yes.
This is Lee. In our research on this particular topic, and I'm making reference to Jamie, and the information that comes to mind may come from the 361 regulation, but I recall that in the, when you're considering trial work experience or extended evaluation, that a formal written plan similar to an IPE needs to be developed so that assurance is provided that trial work experience or extended evaluation has included the informed choice of the applicant before moving forward. So I'm just pointing out that if there is a requirement of some sort, then a formal plan would need to be developed, and this may or may not be done by the TVR programs at the current time.
I agree, Lee. And when an applicant goes into trial work experience, that's almost a separate status. They actually move from application status into trial work experience status, I believe. And they are pending in that status before they are determined eligible. So that is an important piece in documenting, case noting, everything that's taking place in regards to the trial work experience. And then if you are going to complete an extended evaluation, most definitely you have to have the extension completed, signed by the applicant, and placed in the file. So thank you for that. Thank you for that information.
Joanna, Merrick, anyone that's on the phone, you can do a *6 to talk. Joanna from the NES Pierce brings in the consumer and explains that we have not received their medical record. We have to have the consumer sign and agree to the extension. The consumer must sign the extension document and placed under the eligibility, and it's placed in their case file under the eligibility tab. Thank you for sharing, Joanna. Again, anyone that's on the phone that wants to share, just do a *6 to talk. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and move forward. It's already 11 o'clock.
Well, there is somebody else in the chat box, so let's try and make sure we get back to that person. Go ahead.
Thank you.
You want me to move to the next slide?
Yes, please. So once that application status changes, once that application is signed, then the case is considered an open case at that point. So once the case is open and an applicant completes and signs the application for VR services, that case is now an open case. The VR counselor must sign the application for services. And then we go into case open eligibility status. So you go from a signed application to immediately into the eligibility status. So once the VR counselor signs off on an eligibility statement and or creates a case note to support eligibility determinations or decisions, you must have all internal documents and external eligibility documents placed in the consumer's file. And the forms that are associated with eligibility are some of the following forms. The release of information must be in place for Indian Health Services, behavioral health, any specialized physicians, anyone that you are requesting documentation from or receiving documentation from, you must have a signed release of information. And other forms that are specific to the AVERS programs for determination of eligibility are the determination worksheet, any health assessments, any psychological evaluations, any type of evaluations or assessments. You must have all of that data collected and in the case file. You also need to have consent to share confidential information forms completed. And like I said earlier, if you do not have these forms and you need them, you can go to that Dropbox links to the folder for the tools or to the AVERTAC website and download these forms for your program to use. And then also, some folks complete a functional limitations assessment. I'm not sure how many people use that, but it would be important to do that. And then we'll go on to the goals of eligibility. They are as follows. When we're determining eligibility, the goal is to help a consumer to better understand the impediment to employment. So what are the roadblocks to employment? We want to really look at that when we're determining eligibility. And to also help the consumer and the counselor determine what VR services could assist in overcoming employment obstacles. We also want to determine if the consumer will benefit from VR services. As we said earlier, they may have a disability, but will they benefit from VR services? You know, not every person that has a disability will benefit from services. And also, to complete the eligibility determination, we have to determine, you know, this consumer is eligible for VR services. And so different examples and activities, forms, things like that, that revolve around eligibility activities. You may want to look and see if an extension is needed for the collection of medical documents. If so, then you need to create an extension. And depending on your program's policy or your program's system of operating, you'll either create that extension in your software system, which will put the date and extend the evaluation period, or you may just complete a form and have the consumer sign that form and keep that documentation in the case file. So if you have no supporting documentation or you need additional assessments, you know, to determine if a disability does exist, if you don't have any of that information, you cannot determine that there is a disability or that the disability does exist, then at that point, you're probably going to close the file, the case. You know, the case is open once they sign the application, but if you can't determine eligibility, then you're going to have to close that case. I'm not sure what each program has as far as policy in keeping cases open, but in my own personal experience, I feel like it's important to go ahead and close out that case. If the consumer wants to return with additional documentation, or if you can help them with additional assessments, then you could reopen the case. And then the eligibility checklist, we want to make sure if there's a presumptive eligibility, you want to make sure you have that SSI and SSDI documentation in the case file. For sure, you want to have a list of functional limitations. Anything that may be a roadblock to employment, we want to start listing those things because that's going to be important down the road when you start writing the IPE. So areas that are affected, major life areas, for example, interpersonal skills, work skills, self-direction, things of that area, those are major life areas that we look at when we're looking at functional limitations. And then also we're going to start looking at a list of service needs. How do we determine what services are needed once we have determined there is a disability, the eligibility determination has been completed, then we start looking at the impediments and what services can we put in place to remove those impediments to employment. Also, if you're going to complete an eligibility extension for further testing or further assessments needed, you need to go ahead and start, you know, deciding if that needs to be done right away. And then, of course, you need to complete an eligibility determination case note, keep that case note in the file so that you can give a brief synopsis of your eligibility determination. And that'll also go along with your eligibility determination worksheet or your certificate of eligibility form. And then also you want to keep any medical documentation or assessments that you use to determine eligibility. And I think it's very important that you state the disability, the date the disability was diagnosed, and the doctor who diagnosed it, because that's going to be very important to make sure you have that documentation. And once you have these things completed and you've determined eligibility, the next step is IPE development, which has to be completed within 90 days. And so we have upcoming webinars the following 3 weeks with Wayne Daigle.
Hold on, maybe, are there any questions? We do have a little bit of time for questions. It's only 11:03, we have till 11:30. Does anybody have any questions or any comments they would like to make? Oh. Okay, go ahead, Jamie, sorry.
Oh, no. I'm glad you stopped us, because I was looking over at Diane's comment, and she said Glitzy has a form that they use for the extension for an additional 60 days. So that gives them a total of 120 days to determine eligibility. And yes, it does require a signature from the consumer. So thank you, Diane, for sharing that. I'm assuming that you use a paper form versus the computerized system for the extension.
And she said yes.
Okay.
There was a lot of information there, and some of the information was repeated in different, in a different way. Somebody want to, what in this webinar, when you come to a webinar, sometimes you have one thing that you want to solve for yourself. What is the one thing that you came for and you found in the webinar, or one thing that you came for and you didn't find and you would like some information about it or question? So can we put it out there? Can we have some folks that are willing? Again, those of you on the phone can do a *6 to talk. So Joanna, and maybe, I think I called on Susie Calhoun. She might be in the same situation. We could call on Meredith or Minnie or Karen, who have been very gracious in providing information. What about you, Kim? You've been quiet today.
Joanne made it. Joanne made it. Oh, go ahead, Kim.
Oh, sorry, I was eating lunch. I actually have something though. We have a lot of people coming out of prisons and reentry, and like they might have had drug charges and that's why they went, but we can't really find documentation because they weren't treating before they went to prison. Then they get out. We're having issues with eligibility in some cases like that. Anybody have any experience with that?
That's a really good question. This might be when an assessment might be needed, right? If you don't have any documentation of a disability, and if you've exhausted everything, this is where I would recommend an assessment. And anybody else have any ideas for Kim? That's really a hard journey. And then, you know, no documentation of disability, and then they have, you know, a prison record, and they, you know, this makes a VR counselor's job significantly challenging. Is there anything else that you want to share, Kim, about this?
No, I think that's it.
Okay.
Just that it is kind of difficult, you know, to get records, and, you know, they were doing drugs, they were having problems, but documentation.
Yeah, you know, you need I think you just need a totally new assessment, and that could be, I mean, it might not be an assessment that you would need to partner with the state, but you could definitely send them to psychologists or some other thing, you know, that need to, this is where you need to think outside the box. How are you going to do the assessment that would be most beneficial for your consumer or your applicant, you know, potential consumer? Thank you for sharing that. That's a really difficult one to go on.
Wayne made a great comment in the chat box. He said in those situations, he contacts the Department of Correction in which the consumer was located to see if there was any type of assessment. And of course, he does that, you know, after an ROI is completed. So if you can get that consumer to complete an ROI for Department of Corrections, then possibly you could get any documentation they may have as far as disability or assessments.
But also think about the need to have something current as well. Might be something in the past, but you know, disabilities do change, and they generally change in the area where it's progressive and can be a little bit more challenging to cope with as we age. I do see a phone here with a 1208 ... 253. Looks like this individual might be ready to share something. Is there somebody on the phone that would like to share?
Yes, Suzanne, this is Joanna with the Nez Perce Tribe. And I have found, I agree with Wayne, because we've had a few that have been released from prison. And the first time I had one that came out, he brought his assessment. And as I looked at that assessment, I said, oh my gosh, they're really good assessments that do come out of the prison. They're going to list if they have bipolar. They're going to list so many other disabilities where we can help direct them to the appropriate behavior health medical. But it also has wonderful recommendations that can be placed in the IPE to help the individual stay on track, stay focused with medicine, everything. So that's been my experience. And what I ask our participants when they come to apply and they let us know they're out of prison, or we correspond, because a lot of times participants call from prison or write letters. We send applications and a checkoff list and what we would like them to bring that assessment into us once they are released from prison, because it's pretty much pretty well done for you, the first process. Before the 60 days, you got everything you need.
That sounds wonderful, Joanna. And so, you know, when you're looking at what you just shared with us, it's think about all of the barriers that we have without the barrier of being in prison and being released. We always look at the release from rehab or from prison and coming back to the community, that adjustment from a regimented environment to a loose environment where there's no structure. It's really difficult. And when working with these particular individuals, it reminds us how, you know, how grateful that we are in a position where we can do research and perhaps provide a little light in such a dim scenario where somebody is really struggling with so many different barriers to reaching any goal. And it's really wonderful that the VR programs do provide that hope that you can have a goal, you can have a dream, and that each of you out there every day are providing that security blanket that's needed right now for people to get from that crawling stage to a walking stage. So congratulations to each one of you. Oh, somebody just wrote a nice big long one. Diane, are you able to talk, Diane? This is a great one. I'll let Jamie read it if you don't want to talk, but oh my goodness, this looks really great. Thank you. Jamie, you want to read it?
I wanted to add right in this section, while we're talking about Department of Corrections and individuals that are coming to VR after being released, this is a good time for your program or yourself as a counselor to think about having on hand a resource page, a list of resources, or a resource booklet for your consumers, because a lot of folks that are being released, they're coming from a very structured environment with regular medical assessments. Their medications are being provided regularly. So they're coming from a very structured environment and being released. And then there they are on the street with no housing, no medications, no therapist. So it's important to have some resources gathered so that you can go ahead and refer them right on to your local behavioral health agency so that they can have a therapist, get their medications. If they're not receiving any type of Social Security benefits or Medicaid or Medicare, you know, having all of those resources in one place to go ahead and get them started so that you can, you know, later use those same agencies for your documentation process.
Jamie?
Yes, sir.
In your experience with the State VR agency for individuals who are living the corrections facility, were you ever involved in a discharge planning with the corrections facility to lay out a safety net plan for the individual that will be released and where the TVR would step in?
Oh, I wish I had been. That would have helped tremendously to go ahead and start planning prior to the release of the individual. Usually, my experience was our first contact was from the probation or parole officer. They would refer them to VR, and that's when we would pick up with the consumer. But as you said, if there was a plan in place prior to the release, that would, I think, be so beneficial to the consumer. But to answer your question, no, our first contact was usually a referral from the probation or parole officer.
This is Susie. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Susie?
It's working.
Yay, girl.
Hi, guys.
Welcome.
What we do is a lot like Wayne and Joanne. You know, we get a hold of the Department of Corrections, but we also make that parole officer part of our team. So through the ROIs and such, and it's really important that they're on board with you each step, because a lot of times they're cracking the whip of what this person has to do, and it doesn't make sense in what the plan is going to look like if you don't have all that information. And as we know, our group sometimes forgets to add all of the different pieces that they have obligations to. So to make that obligation piece easier and everyone on the same page, we just build a team approach and wraparound service around that person. And we do have those resources ready for people to go, not only for people leaving incarceration, but people that are just coming to the area, that are new to the area, or have recently become homeless, and those type of pieces. We do an assessment usually if we can't get the documents we need. Like you were saying, I think it was Wayne or Joanne that said that, you know, if you can get those release papers, those are great tools and great documentation to have of what's needed. So it looks at what has been in place for that person, and maybe then you make that keep going forward with getting them hooked up with behavioral health and over and getting a wellness check and getting them back into the clinic and those type of pieces. But it's really important for all of our clients to have those resources, but it's really, as you said, someone coming out of incarceration is really a lot harder to serve at the very beginning, because they're going from that institutional living back into the world as theirs again. And we all live in small communities. And so when people come home, sometimes people go right back to what they were doing. Not that they really want to do that, but that's the comfort level. So you always go back to your comfort level. So having the conversations about, you know, what are you going to do to keep successful? What changes are you going to make now that you're out? And the choice is yours. These are your choices.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at what that looks like for you as you're moving forward, and we're getting you ready to come into services. Or sometimes people get started and they just don't want anything. They just want a place to drop, let you know what's going on, and then maybe you don't see them for a month or two. That's why it's really important if we have the parole officer as part of this team when they start the process, we can then start tracking and seeing what happened to this person. Can we get them back to wanting to go to, you know, or whatever they want. I mean, they come in with lots of pieces. Sometimes they just come in because they were told to come in. They have no idea what we do or who we are. And so overwhelming to get all of that information in one sitting. So we try to bring them in 3 or 4 times and really get it across to them what our services are, the benefit of it, and what they really want. So,
thank you. Thank you so much, Susie. I want to jump in real quick, and Gina put a great comment in the chat box, and she said that if you have a tribal reentry program in your area, it's a really good idea to have a relationship with them. So she's with the Iowa tribe of Oklahoma, and they work with another tribe in that area that happens to have a grant. So they work together with them in partnership, and it's really good to have those resources and a relationship. So yes, thank you so much for that input, Gina. If any of you have a tribal reentry program, yes, making sure you have a relationship with them is very important.
Also, Diane mentioned something in the chat. You want to read hers too, Jamie?
Suzanne, Jamie?
Yes, sir.
This may be a point in time for the TVR to share information on traditional healing services to individuals that are being released from the prison or jail system. I would think that traditional healing services and those tribes who practice smudging or some type of purification ceremony would help not only the individual, but the family members as well. And I'm just using Hopi briefly. We conduct purification ceremonies for our men and women that are returning back from the military to create that balance within that individual returning back to our villages and to dispel any of the negative energy that they may have picked up unintentionally. So this may be an opportunity to talk about traditional healing services.
Thank you, Wade. Is anyone out there, is anyone going to share what they may have? I see, I think it might be Joanna. Joanna, did you want to share something? I see your phone there, your phone number. Anyone else want to share anything about traditional healing?
This is Karen. One of my consumers is actually was released from 17 years of incarceration, and part of his plan is to develop a program that will deal with traditional Native healing services for people coming out of prison, to do something very similar to what Lee spoke about in regarding to people being leaving the military, sort of a cleansing and a renaming to help start them on the right path after they get out of incarceration, to start to deal with the guilt and the shame. And reintegration is also part of who I work with in the tribe, and having more resources for individuals to come back and get welcome back in that way is so important.
Well said, Karen. Beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing. And a very important issue. There's times when there are no words to really express the challenges and the beauty of how tribal healing services can help our people that are out there that are feeling quite alone and abandoned. I don't, I would, before we go too much further, we are coming down to the end. It's 11:23, and I just wanted to make sure that you, the survey, John, I don't know how that works, but the survey, you need to remember that. And Jamie, did you want to talk about saving the date? I hate to interrupt this conversation. It's hard to let go of good conversations, but unfortunately we're always in these, we always have these windows of time that we have to be respectful of. Jamie?
I just want to thank everyone for their input and the discussions that we're having, because we're all working together in this same AVERS community. And so being able to have the opportunity to bounce ideas and suggestions and resources off of each other is just so helpful. You know, sometimes we may be sitting there thinking of a question in our mind, and we don't really know that there are other people that may have the same question as well. So thanks everyone for your willingness to share and discuss. So our save the dates, we have upcoming webinars. Moving into the next step of the VR process is IPE development. After you've determined eligibility, then you're going to be determining and creating an IPE with the consumer. Wayne Daigle has created a 3-part series on IPE development, and these are the dates listed here. And we'll be sending out reminder emails to everyone too. So he broke this IPE development down into 3 different training opportunities so that he could discuss each area in depth. So I think that'll be helpful for counselors that are writing IPEs. And I just want to remind everyone, the link to the survey is in the chat box. So please, if you have the opportunity, click on that link, and it won't take but a minute to fill out that survey. We really need your input and feedback. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you, Kim. You're all so gracious. We thank you. I don't know what happened, but.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful program. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.